Welcome back to the deep dive, your shortcut to being well informed. And hey, if you're joining us for the first time, maybe think about hitting that follow button or subscribe where you listen. It really helps us bring more of these deep dives to you. So today we're tackling a single, really fascinating text. It's Text 19 from a source called Human Evolution's End.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this kind of deep dive, it's super relevant if you're, dealing with challenging academic stuff.
Yeah,
Maybe prepping for exams, like a master's entrance exam.
exactly.
Because texts like this, you can't just skim them. You really have to understand every layer, sentence by sentence, argument by argument.
Absolutely. It's about squeezing all the value out of complex writing. So, okay, our mission today, to really thoroughly unpack this specific article, we'll be looking at the main ideas, yeah, and the author's core argument.
Right, and how they build that argument, the
Yeah.
language they use, the structure.
And crucially, how you can approach it critically, with the kind of analytical skills needed for those high-stakes reading tasks.
Precisely. We'll get into breaking down those sentences, the really long ones that often trip people up.
Oh, yeah, those can be tough.
We'll look at specific word choices, like what do they mean here in this context. We'll trace the logic, how the author moves from point A to point B.
And we'll tie it all back to exam questions, right? Using this text to figure out some strategies.
Exactly. Deriving strategies directly from the text and the kinds of questions it generates.
Okay, seriously then. If you happen to have Text 19 handy, that's great. If not, maybe pause and find it, or just listen closely. Get ready to go deep. Let's jump in.
All right. So, first things first. Let's set the stage. What's the core question this article is wrestling with? It's a big one.
Huge. Has human evolution actually stopped?
Or, maybe not stopped dead, but reached some kind of major pause. Or maybe the end of evolution as we traditionally think of it?
And the author, they don't really beat around the bush, do they?
Not at all. They state their thesis pretty clearly up front. That human evolution, specifically the kind driven by natural selection, survival of the fittest, differential reproduction, that kind, is essentially over. Or at least massively reduced in modern society.
Okay, over. That's a strong word.
Yeah.
To really get that, maybe we should quickly recap natural selection itself, just the basics.
Good idea. So historically, natural selection is the engine, right? The main driver of evolutionary change. Think Darwin. Individuals have traits. Some traits make them better suited to their environment. Those individuals are more likely to survive long enough to reproduce.
Okay.
And often they reproduce more successfully than others who are less suited.
Right, more offspring carrying those good traits.
Exactly. So those advantageous traits become more common over generations. It's all about differential survival and differential reproduction, changing the population's gene pool over time.
So the author looks at us, modern humans, living now, and says that whole process, that engine, has basically ground to a halt.
Pretty much, yeah.
Why is that such a big deal? Or, controversial?
Well, it cuts against a common assumption, doesn't it? That evolution is always happening, this relentless background process for all life.
Yeah, you kind of assume it's ongoing.
Right. So the idea that humans, this species that's everywhere, that adapts to everything, the idea that we might have somehow stepped off the biological evolutionary treadmill, that's provocative.
It really is.
It forces you to think about the sheer impact of our own stuff, our technology, our societies, our culture, on our actual biology.
Have we changed the rules so much that biological evolution doesn't apply in the same way?
That's the nub of it. It raises questions about what evolution even means for a species like us, a species that has so radically changed its own environment, its lifespan, everything.
It really shifts the perspective away from slow biological change driven by the environment.
Towards rapid external change driven by us, technology, society.
Okay. So how does the author actually build this case in the text? Let's look at the structure. It seems pretty logical once you map it out.
Absolutely. It's a very structured argument. Paragraph by paragraph, they lay out the pieces. So paragraph 1, it jumps right into historical death rates, specifically looking at males versus females.
Okay.
And it contrasts that history with the present day. This contrast is the first big piece of evidence showing how the opportunity for natural selection, especially through different survival rates, has been massively reduced.
Got it. Survival differences shrinking. Then paragraph 2.
Paragraph 2 brings in the second big factor, changes in fertility. Specifically, it's about the reduction in how much variation there is in the number of children people have.
Not just fewer kids overall, but less difference between families.
Exactly. It's the averaging effect again. And they use India as an example there, making a specific claim about lost selection power.
Okay, survival in para 1, fertility duration in para 2, and then para 3.
Para 3 is the conclusion. It pulls everything together. The author states it directly. Evolution is over.
Wow.
And they explicitly say why. Because technology and society have basically taken over the job.
Right. Did it for us.
And it notes something interesting, that this massive change has happened without much physical change in humans.
That is strange when you think about it.
And then it offers a final thought, maybe a bit cynical or ironic, reflecting on our past and future.
Yeah, you mentioned the tone. It's not just dry data. Words like evolutionary suicide, biological utopia, calling the past ugliness. It feels quite pointed.
It does, assertive. The author isn't just presenting findings, they're actively trying to persuade you.
To persuade you that their take is right, that evolution is done.
Exactly. The audience is likely, educated people interested in science and society, maybe people who assume technology is just like another tool helping evolution along.
When the author's saying it actually stopped it.
Precisely.
Okay, that gives us a really clear roadmap. Let's dive into the details now, starting with paragraph 1, survival and selection.
All right. Paragraph 1 kicks off with a sentence that seems simple, but sets a crucial historical backdrop. Being a man has always been dangerous.
Dangerous. What does that mean here specifically? Like lions and tigers?
Maybe sometimes. But in this evolutionary context, dangerous means a statistically higher risk of dying compared to women at pretty much any stage of life, historically.
Okay, so higher male mortality. That's the baseline.
Yes, and the very next sentence gets the numbers to back that up. But it's a complex one, so let's break it down carefully. This is key for comprehension skills.
Okay, lay it on me.
There are about 105 males born for every 100 females. But this ratio drops to near balance at the age of maturity, and among 70-year-olds, there are twice as many women as men.
Wow, okay. Lots packed in there.
Let's take the first part. There are about 105 males born for every 100 females.
Simple enough, a slight male bias at birth, standard biological fact, uses that there are structure.
Right, an independent clause. Now the but signals a change. But this ratio drops to near balance at the age of maturity.
Okay, so between birth and, say, late teens, early 20s.
That
initial excess of males disappears. The ratio becomes roughly 1-to-1.
Exactly. This ratio is the subject. Drops is the verb. And at the age of maturity, that prepositional phrase tells us when.
Implying
that more males than females died during childhood and adolescence. That's the only way the ratio could balance out, right?
Makes sense. Okay, what about the last part? After the and.
And among 70-year-olds, there are twice as many women as men.
Whoa.
Another clause linked by and. The prepositional phrase among 70-year-olds specifies the age group. By this age, the ratio is 1 man to 2 women.
So the higher male death rate continues after maturity, too.
It seems so. The gap widens significantly throughout adult life, historically speaking.
So that one sentence, it's like a mini history of historical sex-specific mortality. More boys born, equal numbers by maturity, far fewer men in old age.
Precisely. And that pattern is the historical danger of being male, the author mentioned, a consistently lower survival rate across the lifespan.
And from an evolutionary view?
While higher male mortality, especially before or during the main reproductive years, creates strong selection pressure.
Pressure for what?
For traits that help males survive whatever was killing them. Accidents, diseases, maybe conflicts, environmental stuff. Anything that improved male survival odds would be favored by selection.
Okay, that was the past. But the author says things are changing.
The next sentence. But the great universal of male mortality is being changed.
That but is key. Signals the shift.
Absolutely. And universal, that word emphasizes how widespread and consistent this pattern was. For basically all of human history, everywhere.
And is being changed passive voice. It suggests something external is acting on this pattern. It's not just changing on its own.
Right. External forces.
Yeah.
And the next sentence shows the result of those forces. Now, babies survive almost as well as girls do.
Now, present day.
Yeah.
Clear contrast.
Simple comparison. And it directly contradicts the implication from sentence 2 about higher male mortality between birth and maturity. That gap, at least in infancy and childhood, has closed.
Why? Presumably better healthcare, nutrition.
Exactly. Modern interventions. And this change has a consequence, according to the author. This means that for the first time, there will be an excess of boys in those crucial years when they are searching for a mate.
Okay, this means that clear cause and effect, better boy survival, leads to an excess of young men.
Yes. for the first time, highlights this is historically new, a demographic shift.
And why are those years crucial? The text adds that subordinate clause, when they are searching for a mate.
Because mating and reproduction are fundamental to evolution. Survival's only half the story. You also have to pass on your genes.
So changing the ratio of males to females in the prime mating years, that could change the whole dynamic of sexual selection. Competition for mates.
Potentially, yes. Historically, that balance or imbalance would have been a significant selective force itself.
The author then draws the explicit evolutionary conclusion from all this improved survival.
More important, another chance for natural selection has been removed.
More important signals the author's emphasis. This is a key takeaway.
And another chance has been removed. Passive voice again. Something external got rid of this opportunity for selection.
It's chance, exactly.
The chance for selection to act strongly on traits that cause differences in survival rates, especially early in life, where historically males faced higher risks. If everyone survives childhood now, roughly equally.
Then selection can't choose based on who survives childhood anymore, at least not as strongly.
Right. That specific pressure point is relieved.
Okay, so the author makes this general point about survival selection diminishing and then gives a specific example.
Exactly. To make it concrete, 50 years ago, the chance of a baby, particularly a boy baby, surviving depended on its weight.
50 years ago, specific time frame, recent, past. The parenthetical, particularly a boy baby, links back to the earlier theme of higher male risk.
And depended on shows a causal link. Birth weight was a factor determining survival.
How big a factor?
The next sentence makes it stark. A kilogram too light or too heavy meant almost certain death.
Wow, so very strong selection pressure. A narrow optimal range.
Extremely strong. If birth weight has a genetic component, which it does.
Then genes influencing birth weight were under intense natural selection.
Correct. But then, the contrast. Today, it makes almost no difference.
Short, sharp. Today, present. Almost no difference.
Why? Modern medicine. Neonatal intensive care units, better maternal nutrition, C-sections. We can now save babies who are significantly underweight or overweight at birth.
Babies who would have died 50 years ago.
So that intense selection pressure based purely on birth weight, it's largely gone.
And the final sentence ties this example back to the main theme of the paragraph.
Yes. Since much of the variation is due to genes, one more agent of evolution has gone.
Since indicates the reason, because genetic variation influenced birth weight.
And birth weight strongly influenced survival.
Removing the survival consequence removes the selection pressure on those genes.
Right. So the author labels that specific mechanism selection acting on genes via birth weight survival as an agent of evolution, a force driving evolutionary change.
And claims it has gone, disappeared.
That's the claim. Now, let's put our critical thinking hats on for a moment.
Okay.
The author says an agent of evolution has gone. Is that quite right? Or has one specific target of selection, birth weight affecting infant survival, been dramatically weakened?
Yeah, it feels like a specific pathway is blocked, but maybe not the whole agent of natural selection itself. Selection could still act on other traits, right?
Absolutely. And the sentence says much of the variation is due to genes. What about the rest? Environment, maternal health, access to care. Those aren't purely genetic, but they affect survival too. The author's focus is very much on the genetic evolution stopping because the selective pressure is removed.
It seems like a narrow focus on specific, easily measurable survival traits. Like if we stop the obvious dangers, we stop evolution.
That seems to be the thrust of the argument in this paragraph, yes. Removing these harsh filters removes the driver.
Okay, let's connect this detailed breakdown directly to tackling question 1. It asks, what used to be the danger in being a man according to the first paragraph?
Well, our analysis of sentence 2, the one with all the ratios.
105 to 100 at birth, 1 to 1 at maturity, 1 to 2 at age 70.
That pattern is the evidence the author provides for higher historical male mortality. The numbers drop faster for males.
So the danger was a higher death rate, or in other words,
A lower survival rate, which matches option C exactly.
right, option C, a lower survival rate. Let's quickly check the others based only on what's in paragraph 1.
Okay, option A lack of mates.
The text mentions an excess of boys searching for mates as a present consequence, not the past danger. So, wrong time frame.
Good. Option B, a fierce competition.
The paragraph doesn't mention competition as the danger itself. Higher mortality was the danger. Competition might result, but it's not stated as the primary danger.
Correct. Option D, a defective gene.
The text talks about variation due to genes affecting survival, like with birth weight, but not a single general defective gene being the danger of being male. It's about the environment selecting against certain variations.
Perfect. So careful reading of sentence 2 and understanding what those changing ratios imply is crucial. And always check the time frame used to be means look at the historical context.
Fantastic. That's paragraph 1 thoroughly unpacked. Let's move on to paragraph 2. The author shifts focus here, right?
Shifts from survival to the other key component of evolutionary success, reproduction or fertility. It starts by explicitly linking to the previous idea. There is another way to commit evolutionary suicide.
Yeah.
Stay alive, but have fewer children.
Another way, clear signal. And evolutionary suicide, again, that strong phrasing.
It is strong. What does it mean here? If evolution needs variation in reproductive success to work.
Meaning some individuals have way more offspring than others, passing on their traits.
Right. Then if everyone starts having roughly the same number of children, that variation disappears.
So even if you survive, stay alive, if you don't reproduce differentially, have fewer children, or rather the same number as everyone else, you're stopping that engine of change.
Exactly. Evolution is committing suicide because it's losing the variation in reproductive output it needs to operate. Less differential reproduction means less opportunity for selection to favor certain traits.
Got it. Then the author makes a general observation. Few people are as fertile as in the past.
Just stating the widely known trend of decreasing family sizes compared to, say, pre-industrial times.
And contrasts it with an extreme example. Except in some religious communities, very few women have 15 children.
Right. Highlighting how rare historically large families are now, those communities are outliers, exceptions proving the general rule.
Okay, so family sizes are generally smaller, but the author's main point seems to be about the lack of variation.
Yes, that comes next. Nowadays, the number of births, like the age of death, has become average.
Nowadays, present time again. And like the age of death, that explicitly links back to paragraph 1's theme of survival outcomes also becoming standardized or averaged.
The key phrase is, become average. It means the spread or variation in family size has shrunk dramatically. Instead of a wide range from 0 children to, say, 15, most people who reproduce cluster around a much smaller average number.
Which is reinforced by the next sentence. Most of us have roughly the same number of offspring.
Offspring, meaning children, roughly the same, emphasizing the reduced variation.
And just like in paragraph 1, the author spells out the evolutionary consequence of this averaging.
Yep. Again, differences between people and the opportunity for natural selection to take advantage of it have diminished.
Again, linking the logic back to the survival point. Differences between people, underlying genetic variation related to reproduction this time.
And opportunity for natural selection to take advantage of it. That's the mechanism. Selection needs variation to act on. If reproductive outcomes are all similar, the opportunity is reduced, have diminished.
Okay, so reduce variation in survival, reduce variation in reproduction. Both lead to diminished selection. Now, the India example.
Right. To provide some concrete, perhaps quantitative, evidence for this claim about reduced selection due to averaging. India shows what is happening. Simple transition.
How is India used? The text sets up a contrast. The country offers wealth for a few in the great cities and poverty for the remaining tribal peoples.
So comparing two groups, urban upper middle class, wealth for a few, and tribal populations, poverty. These groups presumably have different lifestyles, access to resources, healthcare, maybe different social norms around family size.
You'd think maybe different selective pressures would apply.
Historically, perhaps. But the author uses this contrast to argue that modern life reduces selection, especially in the wealthier group. Look at the final sentence of the paragraph. It's long and dense.
Okay, let's break this one down too. The grand mediocrity of today, everyone being the same in survival and number of offspring, means that natural selection has lost 80% of its power in upper-middle-class India compared to the tribes.
Right. The subject is that phrase, the grand mediocrity of today.
Grand mediocrity. What an interesting term.
Mediocrity here isn't judging people's quality. It means outcomes have become statistically average, less extreme variation. Grand maybe emphasizes the scale, or perhaps it's ironic.
And the part in hyphens clarifies it. Everyone being the same in survival and number of offspring. It directly links back to the points from both paragraphs. Average survival, average reproduction.
Exactly. So that whole phrase is the subject. The main verb is means.
So this state of average outcomes means what?
It means that natural selection has lost 80% of its power. The rest of the sentence is a clause explaining the consequence.
In upper middle class India compared to the tribes, that part specifies where and how this power loss is measured or observed, according to the author.
Yes, the author presents this 80% loss of power as a direct result of the mediocrity, the averaging, in the upper middle class group. They're implicitly suggesting that in the tribal group, where perhaps survival and reproduction are less standardized and more subject to harsh realities, selection still operates more strongly.
Where does the 80% come from?
The text doesn't say. It's presented as a fact supporting the argument. We have to take it as the author's claim based on some unstated analysis comparing these two groups. The key is the comparison and the reason given. The averaging effect reduces selection's power.
Okay, key vocabulary here. Fertile, can reproduce. Offspring, children, diminished, lessened. Tribal, mediocrity, statistical averaging, upper middle class. Understanding mediocrity is crucial.
Definitely. And logic flows clearly. Introduce fertility, show fertility variation is reduced state consequence for selection, bring in India, contrast groups, to claim reduced selection power in the average group. Transitions like another way nowadays, again, means that compared to guide us.
Critical thinking time again. Does this India example really prove it globally?
Good question. Are these two groups truly representative? Is the 80% figure robust science or more illustrative rhetoric? It's a specific example used to support a very general claim.
And again, focusing only on the number of offspring. What about who gets to reproduce at all? Even if everyone who reproduces has, say, 2 kids, maybe selection is acting fiercely on traits that determine who gets to be in the reproducing group. Attractiveness, status, health.
That's a very valid point. The author seems focused specifically on the reduced variance in outcomes, survival length, offspring number, as the key factor removing selection pressure. They aren't really addressing selection pressures related to mate choice or access to reproduction itself in this part.
Okay, this detailed look prepares us for question 2. What does the example of India illustrate? What's the core message from that final sentence?
The sentence explicitly states that the grand mediocrity, average survival offspring, means selection power is greatly reduced, lost 80% in the upper middle class compared to tribes. The example illustrates how modern averaging of outcomes weakens natural selection.
So looking at the options for Q2, option B says, natural selection hardly works among the rich and the poor.
This seems like the closest paraphrase. Upper middle class becomes the rich, tribes becomes the poor. A slight simplification, maybe, and lost 80% of its power becomes hardly works. It captures the essence of the comparison and the finding presented in the text.
Let's check the others quickly. A. Wealthy people tend to have fewer children than poor people.
The text doesn't actually state this in the India example. The point was about reduced variation leading to less selection within the upper middle class, not just a comparison of average numbers between groups.
C. The middle class population is 80% smaller than that of the tribes.
Clearly wrong. 80% refers to selection power, not population size.
D. India is one of the countries with a very high birth rate.
Irrelevant to the specific point the example is making about variation and differential selection power between groups within India.
So option B it is. Identifying that key sentence summarizing the example's purpose is vital.
Absolutely. Now let's move to the grand finale, paragraph 3, the conclusion.
Right. The author starts by making it personal. For us, this means that evolution is over. The biological utopia has arrived.
For us, directly addressing the reader, this means that linking back to the evidence in pairs 1 and 2, and then the big claim, very direct, evolution is over.
Bam. And paired with that phrase, the biological utopia has arrived. What is that exactly?
It's a state where the harsh biological struggles are largely gone, right? Less dying young, less variation in having kids. From a purely biological standpoint of survival and reproduction, life is, well, easier, more predictable. We've engineered away many of the old dangers.
But utopia sounds positive. Is the author saying this is good?
It feels potentially ironic. Is a state without the driver of biological adaptation truly ideal? The author doesn't explicitly judge it as good here, but uses the term to describe this state of eased biological pressure.
Then comes a curious observation. Strangely, it has involved little physical change.
Strangely, the author finds it noteworthy. It refers to reaching this utopia or the end of evolution, and the key is little physical change. Our bodies haven't dramatically altered despite this huge shift.
The next sentence emphasizes human success. No other species fills so many places in nature.
Yeah, highlighting our ecological dominance. We're everywhere. Supports the idea that we've overcome many environmental limitations, achieving a kind of biological success, maybe lending weight to the utopia idea.
But then a sharp contrast with but.
But in the past 100,000 years, even the past 100 years, our lives have been transformed, but our bodies have not.
Using those two time frames, the long haul of human history and the very recent past, really emphasizes the point.
Exactly. Massive changes in how we live, lives transformed, especially recently. But our fundamental biology, our bodies, largely static, have not transformed.
The parallel structure makes it punchy. Lives transform, bodies not.
And then finally, the author gives the explicit reason why our bodies haven't evolved, according to this argument.
The key sentence. We did not evolve because machines and society did it for us.
There it is. The because clause is the core explanation.
Machines and society did it for us. Explain that. It sounds like robots took over evolution.
Not quite. It's personification. Machines represents technology. Society represents our complex social structures, healthcare, agriculture, laws, culture. These things have effectively taken over the job natural selection used to do.
How so?
Instead of needing genes for warmer bodies in cold places, we build houses and make clothes, machinist society. Instead of needing genes for resisting certain diseases, we create vaccines and sanitation, machinist society.
So our inventions and social systems shield us from the environmental pressures that would normally drive biological adaptation through selection.
Precisely. They remove the need for our bodies to change biologically to cope. They solve the problems externally. They did it for us.
Okay, that makes sense within the author's logic. Then there's the Darwin quote.
Yeah, used as an analogy. Darwin had a phrase to describe those ignorant of evolution. They look at an organic being as a savage looks at a ship, as something wholly beyond his comprehension.
Ignorant of evolution, meaning people who don't get how it works, maybe especially in this new context.
I think so. The analogy compares this misunderstanding to how someone unfamiliar with advanced technology, a savage looking at a ship, using Darwin's terms, simply cannot grasp it. It's beyond comprehension.
So the author is suggesting that people who still think human biological evolution is chugging along as usual, driven by natural selection, are fundamentally misunderstanding the situation. They're like the person looking at the ship, unable to comprehend how machines and society have changed everything.
That seems to be the implication. They fail to see that the rules of the biological game have been rewritten by our own creations.
Then the author speculates about the future looking back at us.
No doubt we will remember a 20th century way of life beyond comprehension for its ugliness.
No doubt, author certainty. Future people looking back at the 1900s and finding it incomprehensibly ugly.
Ugliness. Strong word. Could be pollution, war, inequality, who knows? But linked again to beyond comprehension. Future people won't get why we lived like that, just like the savage couldn't comprehend the ship. Or perhaps just like people today misunderstand the state of evolution.
And the very last sentence ties it all together.
Yes. But however amazed our descendants may be at how far from utopia we were, they will look just like us.
But however, a contrast. Even if future people are shocked by our flawed 20th, 21st century lives.
Seeing how far we actually were from a real utopia, despite achieving the biological one.
The main point is, they will look just like us.
The final reinforcement. No significant physical change. Biological evolution of form has ceased. That's the author's mic drop moment.
Key vocab. Utopia, ideal state, maybe ironic. Transformed, changed greatly. Organic being, living thing. Savage, Darwin's term for someone primitive. Comprehension, understanding. Ugliness, descendants, future generations.
And the logic. State, conclusion, take, note, lack of physical change, give reason, text society. Analogy for misunderstanding, future perspective, final reinforcement of no physical change. Very persuasive structure.
Okay, critical thoughts on this conclusion. Is biological utopia really a good thing? What about losing adaptability?
Big questions. Does stopping evolution make us vulnerable in new ways? And is evolution only about physical change via selection? What about genetic drift, new mutations, cultural evolution? The author's definition seems quite specific.
It's a powerful argument, but maybe a narrow view of what evolution encompasses.
Possibly. It's focused tightly on the diminishing power of natural selection on physical traits related to survival and reproduction rates.
Right, which leads us perfectly to question 3. The author argues that our bodies have stopped evolving because we zeroed in on sentence 5, didn't we?
Yep, we did not evolve because machines and society did it for us. That sentence gives the direct cause, according to the author.
So we need the option that paraphrases, machines and society did it for us.
Option A is life has been improved by technological advance.
Technology is the machine's part. The improvement is how it removed the pressures, how it did it for us. This looks like the best fit.
Agreed. Let's check the others. B, the number of female babies has been declining.
Factually wrong based on para 1 and not the reason given.
C, our species has reached the highest stage of evolution.
Author doesn't say we're at the highest stage. They say external factors stop the process.
D, the difference between wealth and poverty is disappearing.
The text doesn't claim this is happening, nor that it's the reason evolution stopped. The India example used the difference to make a point, so option A it is.
Yeah.
Find the cause-effect statement, find the best paraphrase.
Exactly. Okay, we've dissected all 3 paragraphs. Let's quickly synthesize the whole argument before we talk overall strategy.
Good idea. Put it all together.
So paragraph 1 establishes that selection based on differential survival is greatly weakened because modern life makes survival outcomes more uniform, more average.
Using male mortality and birth weight as examples.
Paragraph 2 argues that selection based on differential reproduction is also greatly weakened because modern life tends to make the number of offspring per person more uniform, more average.
Using the general decline in fertility variation in the India example.
Right. So with both pillars of classic natural selection, differential survival and differential reproduction significantly diminished due to averaging effects.
Paragraph 3 draws the conclusion. Therefore, evolution, driven by that kind of natural selection, is over. Technology and society have replaced it as the drivers of change in human life, even though our bodies haven't caught up.
That's the core logical flow. Evidence, reduced variation in survival reproduction, leads to conclusion. Selection diminished, evolution over.
Understanding that flow is key for question 4, the best title question. A good title should reflect that core argument or conclusion.
Absolutely. The author's main point, hammered home especially in the conclusion, is that human evolution has stopped or stalled.
So looking at the options for Q4, option D is human evolution going nowhere.
That seems to capture the essence perfectly. Going nowhere, stalled, stopped. It reflects the author's central thesis.
Let's check the others. A, sex ratio changes in human evolution.
Way too narrow. That's just one piece of evidence from paragraph 1.
B, ways of continuing man's evolution.
Direct contradiction. The author argues it hasn't continued and won't biologically.
C, the evolutionary future of nature.
Too broad. The focus is strictly on human evolution, not all of nature. So D is the clear winner. Find the main thesis, often in the intro or conclusion, and match it.
Okay, great. We've gone deep into the text and the questions. Let's wrap up by pulling out some broader exam strategies based on how we tackled this. Things listeners can use on any tough passage.
Good plan. First takeaway. Always identify the main ideas. What's the overall thesis? What's each paragraph about? Look for topic sentences, conclusions, repeated concepts.
Second, trace the argument. Follow the logic. Pay super close attention to those transition words, but since, therefore, again, however. They are like signposts telling you the relationship between ideas. Contrast, cause, example, inclusion. Mapping these is critical.
Third, analyze examples. When you see one, like India, ask why it's there. What point does it support? The surrounding sentences usually tell you its purpose. Don't just read the example. Understand its function in the argument.
Fourth, and maybe the most important for complex texts, practice breaking down long sentences, like we did. Find the main subject and verb, identify all the clauses and phrases, figure out what modifies what. It's painstaking, but it's the only way to be sure you understand precisely what's being said. Reverse engineer the grammar.
Fifth, vocabulary and context, always. Don't guess or use the first definition you know. Words like agent, mediocrity, universal had specific meanings here. How is the author using the word in this specific sentence to make their specific point?
Sixth, adapt your reading. Know when to skim for gist, like for a main idea question, and when to slow write down and do detailed analysis, like for a question about a specific sentence or inference. Match your technique to the question.
Seventh, be aware of the author's stance and tone. Are they neutral or persuasive? Are they using loaded words? Suicide, utopia, ugliness. Recognizing their viewpoint helps you separate their interpretation from objective fact if necessary.
Eighth, crucial for tests, base answers only on the text, no outside knowledge. Resist the urge to bring in what you already know about evolution. Answer based solely on the information presented in those paragraphs.
And finally, watch out for tricky answer choices. Test makers love distractors that use words from the text but twist the meaning, or that are true in general but not supported by this text, or that answer a different question. Compare each option meticulously back to the passage. Be paranoid.
Excellent summary. So that was our deep dive into Text 19. We unpacked the argument that traditional human evolution is over, thanks to technology and society smoothing out survival and reproduction. We broke down sentences, vocabulary, logic, and linked it all to exam skills.
Yeah, it's a provocative claim the author makes that we've engineered this biological utopia that has inadvertently shut down the engine of biological change.
It definitely leaves you thinking. Based only on this text, how convincing do you find the argument?
And a final thought to chew on. If traditional biological evolution has slowed or stopped for humans, what now? Does evolution just take different forms? Cultural, technological? Is that even evolution in the same sense?
Definitely food for thought. We really hope you'll go back and reread Text 19 now. Maybe try applying these analysis techniques yourself, break down sentences, map the logic, question the claims. Practice makes perfect.
Absolutely. And let us know what you thought of this deep dive. Did anything particular stand out? Is there other texts or topics you'd like us to tackle in this way?
Thanks so much for joining us on this exploration of Text 19. We hope it sharpens your reading skills and gives you confidence for whatever texts you face next.
Catch you on the next deep dive.